Yesterday my boss literally ran away from work after quitting. What is the strangest way you've seen someone quit? I got fired last for criticizing the management of my small kitchen. I was in the manager's tiny office and when he said the words I stood up, took off my work shirt, and proceeded to let out an excruciatingly long and obnoxiously loud fart. When it petered out I stood there in silence for about 10 seconds before turning and walking out. When I was a manager for Walmart in the Boston metro area, there was this guy who said he wanted to transfer to Atlanta to be closer to family. We told him he wasn't able to transfer for about 6 months because he had several write-ups and was basically almost out the door. So some time goes by, maybe a couple of months, and I was actually moving to Atlanta as well. I start work at my new store and a couple days go by and I see this same guy working overnight. I went up to him and we chatted for a bit, although there was a severe language barrier since he was from Haiti, and I figured he was just rehired in this store because we had actually terminated him because he stopped coming to work, because he moved to Atlanta. Turns out he was working in the store for a couple months even though he had been terminated because he stopped showing up at his job at the old store without speaking to anyone about what was going on. He wasn't even getting paid for the whole time he was working at the new store. He was just showing up and working. Overnight management just figured he wasn't in the system yet because of the transfer, but that only takes a couple weeks at most. I had to figure out how long he had been working and how much he should have been paid and then pay him out, but in the end we weren't able to rehire him. My first job out of school, I worked in a t-shirt shop doing graphic design for minimum wage. Actually I ended up cleaning screens half the time, which is a really terrible job. This was the day that O.J. Simpson got off. We were listening to it on the radio. I'm not sure if it influenced me or what. I changed the screensaver on my computer and set it to the one with scrolling text in giant letters "I quit," and told them I was going to lunch at Taco Bell. I was actually applying for a job there. A few years later I meet a guy who ended up in the long run being one of my best friends in college who also happened to work there about a year after me. Apparently they didn't know how to change the screensaver, and instead of trying to figure out how they moved the whole graphic artist station from the front of the shop to the back so that no customers could see the screensaver. I swear to fricking god, every screen printing outfit in the world is totally fricking inept with computers. I worked at a computer parts repair place a few years ago. The nearby Kmart was on its way to going under, and like rats from a sinking ship, the employees of the electronics depot were desperately trying to get tech computer jobs in the area. Enter Mickey. Fake name. Mickey was one of the many Kmart employees to interview at the store, and according to my boss, the only one to pass muster. Mickey had some idiosyncratic ideas about computers. For instance, he didn't like the way his hard drive made his computer case vibrate, so he wove a hammock for it out of used shoelaces. Mickey had spotty attendance, at best, and would frequently walk into work hours late or not at all. This was unacceptable to my boss, and he told Mickey in no uncertain terms that if he was going to be late or absent, my boss wanted some notice, so that he could give the repair jobs that Mickey had been working on to another tech. Mickey had a pregnant girlfriend, and many of his absences were due to taking her to medical appointments. He tried to make the claim to my boss that those appointments were the reason he hadn't called in. My boss asked him who had made the appointments. Mickey. My boss then asked why, if he had been the one to make the appointments in the first place, how they had prevented him from calling in. Mickey's response was to mumble something about the signal noise ratio. My boss's response was that the signal noise ratio was 0. Since there had been no signal, Mickey took his lunch break early and never came back. In keeping with his earlier actions, he never even contacted the store after that conversation. One guy I worked with walked into the kitchen, dropped tro, and mooned everyone on the line. I saw what he was doing out of the corner of my eye, so I whipped a green pepper slice at him. He yelled, so I think it hit him somewhere sensitive. For whatever reason I imagined this as a jovial game of pin the tail on the donkey, but instead of pin it was a ninja style like green pepper slice, and instead of a tail it was rusty, saggy ballsack. I once worked as a fry cook at the only 24-hour diner in Boston. All the other fry cooks were Brazilians who worked ridiculous hours to send money back home. By that I mean, after working the overnight shift on a weekend when every frickin' drunk butt douchebag is 2 feet behind you telling you to make him some frickin' burgers. These guys would then leave that job at 6 AM and go straight to the cleaning offices across town. Anyway, one night Marco is on the phone to his wife in Brazil and they're arguing about something in the most rapid fire Portuguese I've ever heard. He puts down the phone, slowly looks up, pauses, and screams, "I think my wife is cheating on me." Then he pommel horses over the counter, bolts out the door and is never heard from again. I dream about doing this every day, just standing up and walking out. No harsh words, no cussing, nothing. Just jitting up and done with it. The only thing stopping me is my best, only, friend who also works there. Most of the workload would land on his shoulders, and I can't justify doing that. Oh, and the lack of an income with which to pay off my mortgage. That's also kind of important. An apprentice at my work, only there shortly, did not show up one day, which is not unusual for an apprentice. Then on day 2 he called his wife. She said she had no idea where he was. Then on day 5 his wife calls back and apologizes for lying and that he had been in jail the whole time and quit for him. He picked up his toolbox 2 weeks after. Not quit, but fired. I used to run a phone room where we called to raise money for the local police groups. This kid was working for us, young 20s. He kinda sucked, but we needed bodies on the phone and he showed up. Well, he started sporadically not showing up for work. It was a part-time gig and I am pretty lenient about people missing shifts every now and then, but only to a point. The shift is 4 hours, 5-9 PM, prime calling time. Come in at 5, break at 7, leave at 9. This kid comes in at 5, goes outside to smoke at 7, never comes back. Okay, I figure, dude quit. It happens. He could have said something, but whatever. The next night at 7:15 on the dot, kid walks in and sits at his desk. He had just taken a 24-hour break without telling a soul. I couldn't believe it. I explained that this was unacceptable and he was no longer employed there. Bonus: I swear this is true. Next night he comes in at 5 and sits down. He asks me, "What are we calling tonight?" It took me writing "you are fired" on a scrap of paper before he could get it in his head that he no longer worked for me. Yeesh. Busy Friday night behind the bar. Other bartender walks up to me and says he needs a break. Now? I ask. He replies now and forever and leaves. I hired a 22-year-old kid. His first day went really well and everybody liked him. The next morning I got a call from his father who told me our new employee had gone to bed early and never woke up. Some kind of undiagnosed heart condition. A couple of us went to the wake. I lost a friend that way a while back. Oh, I caused one of these once. I was talking with a buddy about a book series we were both reading and the third guy in the room with us was ominously silent. We finally shut the frick up and asked him what was wrong when he'd been silent for far too long. He whirls on us with the crazy eyes going and growls out, You always do that." "Do what?" "Spoilers." He's so mad he's spitting. "You spoil everything. I wanted to read that series but now I can't because spoilers." "Well, sorry, man. You should have told us. But in fairness, those books came out 30 years ago so the statute of limitations on spoilers is pretty much up." No, he's breathing really hard like that angry breathing cartoon characters and nerds do. Red-faced and angry hun hun hun. No spoilers. You can't spoil things. Dude, we're not going to stop talking about everything just because one day you might want to read or watch something. But tell us if it's something you're reading or watching now and we'll keep quiet. He gets real quiet for a second as he realizes we are not going to give in on this. In all fairness, he was one of those people that does not want you talking about anything ever because one day he may possibly want to read or watch it and no spoilers. And then he screams and grabs the sides of his head in his hands, stands up, literally runs out the door, and then we hear it fading away into the distance. And we look outside and see he's running out to his car, still screaming, getting in, and driving off. Never saw him again. If I ever find the need to quit a job I don't like, now I know how I'm going to do it. I had a person at my job who wrote a big long email bashing her supervisor, the CEO and another employee, as well as crying about the fact her co-workers never asked her to go to lunch with them. She selected everyone on her personal contact list and the company's directory including the help desk system. Our system sends an automated response anytime someone opens a new ticket. Between all the people reporting her email, out of office messages, and delivery failures, she crashed our email server and the help desk server. I have since quit as well. Not special. Sorry, so I can't really blame this guy. QA and food production. 65-70 hour weeks on rotating schedules including graveyard, and way more responsibility than making $13 HR should give you. I made a mistake my first week that cost $64K, and I got screamed at for it even though I was still training and no one had explained the relevant protocol. With that as the background, co-worker, Jay, was alone on shift and had everything go wrong. Major issue, people screaming, huge stress, etc. When the next lady came in to help give him a lunch, he'd been there 8 hours without a break. He took off without a word, never came back. Boss found a tiny post-it near the lab counter that just said I left. Jay. She called, thinking something was wrong, maybe with his pregnant wife. Nope, he just wasn't coming back in. That was it. Then he hung up and never talked to anyone again. Then he never talked to anyone again. That's no way to treat a pregnant wife. Not quit, but got fired. My first job was at a popular milkshake and burger chain. My boss was this middle-aged guy, nothing obviously wrong with him. He seemed like he had just been handed a bad lot in life because he was smart and he was a dreamer. But there he was, as GM of a crappy restaurant. This guy smoked like a chimney and always had alcohol on his breath, never violent though, and always had crazy stories to tell me after the weekends. One Monday he came in an hour and a half late for his morning shift looking awful, disheveled and somewhat pale. When I asked him what was wrong, he told me that he was drinking with some friends the night before. The last thing he remembered was multiple H showing up. He had woken up that morning in a hotel an hour away from work with bite marks on his dong and about $300 missing from his wallet. Anyway, he didn't get along very well with our district manager. They were always arguing about the store even though I thought we were doing fine. The DM made it a point to supervise our work with a surprise visit and compliance audit once a week. Made the entire line crap bricks every time too. Well, during one of our audits the DM and GM started arguing again. I'm not sure what it was about, but it was a lot more heated than normal. It's important to note that our DM was pregnant at the time. Suddenly I hear a crash coming from the back office, followed by a scream from our GM of I hope you're a better mother than you are a manager, you freaking B, and he walks out. He was demoted to shift supervisor and moved out of our district. TLDR crazy general manager flips crap on pregnant district manager, gets demoted and moved out of district. Playing golf with some pals. One of them has to work, calls from a payphone at the course to call in sick, and as he is talking to the boss his name is being paged to get to the tee box. Fired on the spot. Everyone in the deli at this store I worked at talked about the way one guy quit. He was always a weird guy, just kind of odd and would say weird things. Not like he's going to stab me weird, but enough that you just had to laugh at him rather than attempt to understand what he was getting at. One day, he comes down the stairs from the break room office area holding this pair of massive work boots. He holds them up, grinning, and says, "Them's my walk-in shoes." He left and never came back. I was in charge of a graveyard shift commercial cleaning crew. We had this one kid who basically came from nothing and had nothing but was one of the sharpest kids. He was 20, I've encountered. His dad left when he was a child and his mom would binge on C and alcohol pretty regularly. Awful circumstances. Anyways, we'd started to see his work quality diminish over the past month and even had to confront him out stuff he was skipping over. It was causing issues with the customer. I knew he was doing it to get off work early, 2-3 AM, in order to spend time with his new girlfriend who I'm sure provided some sort of new escape for him. One day the boss got a call about some poor work quality that we knew was this kid's responsibility. That was that. We were unloading the truck on a particularly cold, rainy Thursday morning at the end of the pay period. I walked up to him after he changed out of his uniform and handed him an envelope. I told him we got one call too many on his work performance and that would be the last check from the company. He didn't say anything, but I saw his eyes begin to well up with tears. He picked up his backpack, walked about 50 yards and hopped a fence into the darkness. Saddest day on the job ever. That wasn't funny at all. I saw the guy try to subcontract out his own job. I was working as a programmer at a small company, and we had this one guy that had been hired because he was buds with another programmer. We were incredibly busy at the time, so they hired this guy on a recommendation without bothering to find out if he could actually program. Surprise. He couldn't. Not even a little bit. Eventually everyone realized that he was so bad that it was just causing more work for the rest of us. So they got ready to fire him. The guy caught on and decided that, instead of getting fired, he was going to turn into a one-man employment agency and hire his own replacement to do all of his work for him. He didn't inform anyone of this plan, though. One morning he just walked in with this other guy that none of us had ever met before, sat him down at a computer, and started training the guy to do his own job. Somehow he couldn't understand why this wasn't an entirely reasonable thing to do. I worked with a slacker kid at a coffee shop who kept trying, unsuccessfully, to get fired so he could collect unemployment. I'm not sure how unemployment actually works, but I doubt he would be eligible because he wasn't there for very long. The manager was friends with his sister, which is why he was hired in the first place, so she didn't want to fire him. First time he called in was maybe a week after he started. He said his truck wouldn't run. We saw him drive past a couple hours later. It wasn't hard to miss him as his truck was painted a really unusual shade of green. Second time he called in was to say he was drunk. Third time, a friend committed suicide. Fourth time, to say he had to attend the funeral of said friend, but I guess he forgot he'd told us the guy killed himself because he said it was a heart attack. Next time, he said he was stuck at someone's house with a bunch of people who were doing drugs and he was afraid to leave because they were all so messed up and they might attack him. Then he stopped calling in and just didn't show up. During this time, two of the people who worked there, myself included, were tremendously pregnant and he, being a healthy 20-something male, was expected to help us carry out the patio furniture in the mornings. I was 8 months pregnant, dragging out heavy metal chairs and tables at 5:45 am and then would often see him drive past the store later in the day. Finally I got hold of him on the phone and was like, look, I can't open this place by myself and need you to here to help me take out tables and chairs. He just started screaming at me that I expected too much from him and it wasn't his fault that I'd gotten knocked up. True enough. And this job was bulls because no one can get up that early in the morning and he was never freaking coming back. I think he worked a total of 7 days out of over a month. And though he had a lot of difficulty making it to shifts, he was right there when paychecks were handed out. When I was a kid I worked in a gas station nights and weekends. We got a new owner after I had worked there for 3 years who didn't have any respect for the high school kids who basically ran the place. He hired managers to supervise us who we would have to train and babysit and fix all their mistakes. The new boss fired my friend because the till was short $100 on a Saturday night. Guy was the most diligent and honest person I had ever met. I went to the new boss and told him that it was probably the new manager who had screwed up and not processed a payment. A week later I got fired too. Went out and got a new, better job straight away. Came back to collect my last paycheck and the new owner was out on the forecourt talking to one of the managers. When I walked up the new boss said that they had found the missing money and that I had been right. It was the manager's mistake. He shook my hand and apologized for firing me. I was 17 at the time, so it was a big deal to do that. I told him I appreciated his apology and said if he had a minute I could show him some stuff. We then walked back in and I explained to him all the ways that it was possible to void payments. Basically, I told him all the things that all of the kids that had worked there had shown each other over the years, that there was a 200-gallon loss per week. Gas didn't used to be as closely monitored, leakage from old tanks, spills, etc. That by holding down a few buttons could be voided from the system. We used it to hide our mistakes over the years, pay for our takeout on long shifts, put gas in friends' cars. The only person who never used it was the kid he had fired. Told him I wasn't the person he should be apologizing to. He called the kid he had fired and brought him in and apologized to him. Wrote him a great reference. Spoke to the employer at the place he was trying to get a job. I worked with a hero when I was 15. His name is Troy. The owners of the ice rink where I worked were not good people. They were rude, arrogant and neglectful. Case in point, They demanded that I work Good Friday. I was somewhat religious then, but the bigger deal was that it was my day off from high school. They then bragged about how they were taking their 3 bratty sons out to their lake house for a weekend of tubing and jet skiing. Since I was 15 and didn't know any better, I worked doing the important task that needed to be done, sweeping pebbles off of the parking lot for 6 hours. So, a couple months pass and I move up to the concession stand. They have now hired Troy, an ex-hockey player, and he did not take their crap. For a 15-year-old kid, he was the best boss. Funny, played hockey with me before after work to help me with my skills, and really inappropriate, but never in front of customers. Anyways, after a few months where he was really getting into it with the owners, he didn't show up to work for a few days unannounced. When he finally came in, he had a broken nose and a black eye. His story was that he was helping an old lady who was getting robbed, and the 2 guys beat him up. I loved working with Troy, but even I didn't buy it. At the end of our shift that day, I was waiting for my dad to pick me up and he is called into the owner's office. I hated this woman. She was so entitled and bratty, and worst of all, treated everyone like garbage. I can hear muffled voices getting louder, and then it just escalates. Troy is yelling. She is yelling. This goes on for a minute. Then I hear Troy say, "You know what? You're just a huge C." Then, like movie, he calmly walks out of the office. As he walks by me, he lightly punches me in the arm and says, "I swear to God, I'll see you around, kid." And I never saw him again. But it was the best work day ever. Former co-worker pushed for a specific DB solution that he knew, made a good business case for it, mentioned his past experience with it, took a year to have the decision go through, got it implemented, running well. All the kinks worked out over multiple long late nights and weekends, but nobody else knew more than the basics on how things worked. His resignation letter had his consulting offer underneath it. We paid. Not that strange, but still the strangest I have seen in a limited career. I waited tables at a sports bar. One of the other waiters was a rich enthusiast and general butthole. He once hijacked most of my tip from a party of about 50 he and I were handling, and then didn't want to tip the bar for the day. He never helped anyone out if they were in the weeds. Wouldn't help but he was a general douche. Everyone hated him. When the manager would try to talk to him about it, the guy would just give him attitude or tell him to frick off. One day the manager told the hostess to fill his section and keep it full. He said it didn't matter if the other sections didn't get any tables, he would make it up to the other servers. Since he didn't help anyone out, nobody felt bad about not running drinks for him or starting tables off to help the guy. By the second time that his section had filled up, the H guy went to the hostess and said, "What the frick are you doing?" She said the manager told him to do it, so he asked the manager the same. He replied it was how the restaurant was filling up and he couldn't do anything about it. H guy says, "I know exactly. So, H guy calls another restaurant in town and asks if they are hiring, right in the middle of his shift, and gets a job at that restaurant right then and there and asks if they can come pick him up from our restaurant, which someone from the other restaurant did. He never said he was quitting, he was just gone. One of the other waiters had to tell the manager that the guy left. It was actually pretty awesome. The manager moved his current tables to the other servers and we all got free food drinks that night. It was a pretty surreal day. There was a guy at my work who just left a sticky note on his computer that read, "Going camping. Be back in a week." He came back a year later and got his job back. This was sent to the entire company before they could shut down her email access. I just wanted all to know that manager fired me today without any reason other than she doesn't feel I'm working out here. After a whole year. Isn't that something? She doesn't know how to run the accounting department. She hurts the department financially with unfound reasonings for a lot of things that go on there. Just in case any of you wondered why we are doing so bad financially as well as management material, she is not for does want to hear anything if it's not her way. I want to thank all of you for your patience and help over the last year and for most in the company. Just a word of advice, like if you don't already know, watch your backs. Comma as well as management material, she is not for does want to hear anything. Look. I had a guy I worked with for about 2 years who was not exactly a great performer. One Friday he got called in and put on the program. Basically you have a few months to rectify whatever crap you are doing. Really, it's a heads up that you will be fired and the company is just taking the standard steps to make sure they do it right. The next Monday the guy just never showed up for work. I found out months later that he claimed mental health disability and continued to get paid for 2+ years per company policy. Haha, guess he had the last laugh. My roommate told me about a girl that worked at Barnes & Noble with her. Apparently they always fire people on Friday and the girl in question somehow knew her head was going to be up on the chopping block. So on the day she assumed she was getting fired, she brought a few items with her to help her go out with a bang, so to say. When they called her to the manager's office, she slipped on a pair of designer high heels she'd brought with her and filled her pockets with glitter. Upon being fired and walked out of the store, she turned around in the front of the store, reached in her pockets, and threw glitter everywhere, clicked her heels and ran out of the store. I know what she did was technically wrong because she ruined a lot of books, but if I were to ever go out with a bang, it would be like that. Place I used to work decided to schedule a mandatory meeting for the day after my 21st birthday. But I should also mention, this was a weekend day, not one of my regularly scheduled shifts, and the meeting was scheduled to last about a half hour. Also, they decided to schedule this for 8 AM. When people would mention this meeting, I was sure to add a, which I will not be attending, portion to the conversation. So, the day after my 21st birthday day of the mandatory meeting comes. Behold, I am not at said meeting. At about 8:10 AM, a call comes in. It goes like this. Hello, hey, Theoarosis Ball. Were you planning on coming to the meeting today? Had I not clearly stated I wouldn't be in today? Yeah, but are you coming in or not? I'm gonna go back to sleep. Click, and that was that. I used to work in a kitchen at a locally owned restaurant, and one of the chefs got so fed up with the amount of eggs Benedict he had to make. What did this guy do? He grabbed a big butt steak knife and cut the freaking palm of his hand and swiped it all along all the walls while screaming at the top of his lungs, then just walked out. Never saw the dude again. Worked at a grocery store for my first job as a cashier. One of the fellow employees hired with me was pretty cool and we got along. Let's call him Tom. After a month of working there, he would always say he is going to quit. It became an everyday thing, so I just took it as that is how he coped with working there. So one busy Saturday morning he is at the register behind me. We bag the groceries ourselves as well. This guy enters Tom's line on with a full cart and 2 kids. The only reason I looked back is because they were being obnoxious and the guy was talking loudly on the phone. Tom tries to be friendly and greet the customer, but the customer just ignored him. He had scanned most of the items and one of the last items was a jug of milk. Now for some reason we are supposed to offer bags for milk jugs even though they have handles on them. Tom asks the customer, would you like your milk in a bag, sir? Sir. Customer. Still on the phone. What? Yes. God dang it. Can't you see I am on the phone? So rude. I look back from overhearing that and I can see Tom trying not to seem angry, but I was helping my own customer. Tom says okay with a forced smile, takes the milk jug, opens it, pours it all into a bag, and presents it to the customer. The customer is startled and says, what the frick is this? Tom, your milk. You said you wanted it in bag. The customer looked dumbfounded and started yelling. Tom just dropped the bag, spilling milk all over the counter, floor, and customer. Tom just turned and walked out, never to be seen again at the store. Pretty awesome way to quit if you asked me. Bad thing is I had to clean up the milk and deal with the rest of the angry customers' items. My manager didn't believe the story and we had a nice laugh about it once the guy left. I had a friend years ago who was a master at manipulating the unemployment welfare system. Once, he hatched a plan to work at a local factory, which was famous for quick firings for any infraction. Just long enough to qualify for unemployment, and then get fired. He diligently did just enough work to get by for a year, long enough to qualify for unemployment. After that, he simply stopped working. He'd show up, but he wouldn't do anything. His line would just back up until they pulled somebody over to cover for him. After a few days of that, he was predictably fired. On his way out, he was directed to HR, where he was asked to sign some papers saying that he had been fired and wasn't to return. He smugly signed and walked out the door. Upon applying for his hard-earned unemployment, He learned that one of the documents that he had signed indicated that he was, in fact, resigning by his own choice, and thus not entitled to any unemployment benefit. TLDR. A guy spends a year trying to get unemployment, but is too stupid to get fired. We once fired a weird guy from the cubicles and he sent the entire company an email. I have a surprise for you all tomorrow. He showed up the next day after he was let go wearing a trench coat and black shades. He walked into the office and pulled 2 fully loaded, semi-automatic squirt guns out from under his coat and he soaked the entire staff. He emptied both clips and as he turned to leave he stopped to say surprise. He later went on to become a nobody. This must have been years ago. There's no chance he doesn't get arrested shot in this day and age. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.